Okay, last way that we transport carbon dioxide in the body or in the blood is as bicarbonate ion. Okay, so remember, most of our CO2 gets carried as bicarbonate ion. So this is about 70% of our CO2. Okay, let me tell you about this. We have an enzyme called carbonic anhydrase, which is located in our red blood cells. Okay, carbonic anhydrase catalyzes the conversion of CO2 and water to this molecule here, which we call carbonic acid. Carbonic acid is very short-lived and dissociates easily into hydrogen ion and this molecule here, which is bicarbonate ion. Okay. I also want to mention that since carbonic acid is so short-lived, usually we abbreviate this set of equations to this. Okay, so we usually simplify this equation to this equation here. Okay. All right, so I'm going to have you consider these questions right now. Okay, so looking at these equations, what direction would the equation proceed in if PCO2 increased? What direction would it proceed in the tissues? What direction would it proceed in the lungs? So go ahead and hit pause, think about that for a moment, and then resume when you're ready. Okay, so hopefully you figured this out. If we increase CO2, okay, we have an increase in CO2, what we're going to do is we're going to drive the forward reaction to favor the formation of hydrogen ion and bicarbonate. In the tissues, we're going to have a high CO2. We're going to have like kind of an increase in CO2. The tissues are producing CO2. So same thing, we're going to drive the forward reaction. We're going to drive the formation of hydrogen ion and bicarbonate ion. Okay. In the lungs, we're going to be depleting CO2, right? So as we breathe, we're removing carbon dioxide from our system. So that's going to cause our CO2 to go down. Therefore, we're going to drive the leftward reaction, which favors the formation of CO2 from hydrogen ion and bicarbonate ion. Okay, so hopefully you remember your principles of equilibrium, which all of this is based on. Okay. One more thing I just want to mention quickly in passing is notice that the more CO2 we have, the more we're favoring the formation of hydrogen ion, okay? Which means that CO2 levels are very intimately linked with pH, okay? So this is why ventilation is key in regulating our body's pH. That's all I'm going to say about it for now. I just want to mention it. We're going to talk about it in much more detail later, but I just wanted to mention that. Okay, so let's take a look at what happens with CO2 in the tissues. So this is basically just kind of illustrating the concepts that I went over in the previous slide. Okay, so in the tissues, we're producing CO2. Okay, we want to get that CO2 into the blood and carry it away from the tissues so that we can exhale it from our bodies. Okay, so let's take a look at how that happens. Okay, so CO2 from our tissues enters our red blood cells. It gets converted to hydrogen ion and bicarbonate ion by carbonic anhydrase. I kind of simplified there, but essentially that's what happens, right? Now, in order to continue the forward reaction, right, in order for this forward reaction to proceed, we're going to need to get rid of these products, right, based on the principles of equilibrium, okay? So we're going to need to do that in some way, and this is how we do it. Okay, so first is our hydrogen ion is going to bind hemoglobin to form this molecule here, okay? Secondly, we're going to need to remove bicarbonate. So the way we remove bicarbonate is we transport it out of the red blood cell in exchange for chloride ion, okay? For reasons that are not really clear to me, there is a name for this transport. It's called the chloride shift, okay? I also want to mention this bicarbonate that goes out into the plasma is actually plays an important role in our blood in kind of as a buffer for pH, okay? So again, in order to allow CO2 removal from the tissues, we need this reaction to continue in the forward direction. And these are the methods that we are using to deplete our products so that we can continue to form them, basically, okay? All right, now let's take a look at what happens at the lungs, okay? We are, as we breathe, we offload CO2 from our lungs, okay? As we do that, we're going to reverse the processes that we saw in the previous slide. So I'm going to ask you to take a moment now, hit pause, and think through that. So what are the processes? How are we going to reverse them? So go ahead and hit pause. Okay, so this is how we're going to remove CO2 from our lungs. Well, we remove CO2 from our lungs by breathing it out, but then that also kind of pulls all of our equilibrium reactions in the opposite direction than what we saw in the previous slide. Let's go over what that is, okay? So again, as we breathe out CO2, we are depleting our CO2 levels. That's going to pull this equilibrium reaction in this direction, in the rightward direction, which means that we are also depleting our carbonic acid levels, which means that we are also depleting our bicarbonate and hydrogen ion levels, which means that we're going to basically be pulling our reactions in favor of bringing more HCO3 minus and H plus into the cell. How do we do that? For our bicarbonate, what we do is we bring it back into the cell in exchange for chloride, okay? For our hydrogen ion, we're going to dissociate it from hemoglobin, okay?